Alright, so let's get this all connected. I'm going to be using the printer port, which has a little icon up here on the Powerbook and next to the serial port on the rest of those, to wire everything up. So we've got everything wired up now, and I've got my System 7 network access disk created. So let's get to installing. So I apologize for how I have to film this. I've discovered that the Powerbook 165 doesn't operate in what I call closed lid mode, i.e. where I can close the lid of the laptop and have the primary display be output to the external monitor. So for this install part, I have to film like this. This machine does support dual monitors though, so once we get past this initial setup, I can switch the primary display to the external monitor and capture video with my open source scan converter. So I've booted up this machine with the network access disk, and I want to do a few things to get ready for install. So first is partitioning, and then after partitioning I'm going to copy files from the PowerMac G3 down to this machine. And I copy them down to this machine because disk space right now is plentiful, and it's a whole heck of a lot faster than trying to run the whole install over local talk. You can do that, but it takes about an hour and a half to do the install, or if not more. So we go to our chooser here, and we'll select AppleShare, PowerMac G3, and hit OK. Now we have to log in, so mark. And I have all of my files on this G3 Data 1. So I want to repartition these drives, and I'm using a utility called Lido 7. This was a popular utility back in the day. It can handle basically any kind of SCSI drive. The built-in disk setup from System 7 is really particular. It wants to see Apple drives, so that's why I'm not using that. Now, Lido 7 has recently been released under the GPL, which I love to see. This, I think, is a compiled, pirated copy from back in the day. So the first thing I'm going to do here is format this. And now we're going to go up to partition. Now, if I wanted to, I could have some predefined here and make it easy on myself. There's a maximum max setup, which basically makes one big volume. This makes 2 volumes. And this makes 4 volumes, all of equal size. And then this is minimum volume. But I want to do some customization here. I'm going to select the default icon. And let's put down our first partition. So we want this to be a Macintosh volume type, and I want it to be 0.5 GB. So that's 524.288. And we need to give it a name. So I'm going to name this PB for Powerbook System. This is going to be our system volume. Now before, I've tried this a couple times. I used to have a space between PB and system, but AppleShare complained to me about that when I was trying to set up the Apple II boot up. So no space, one word. And this one picked up the name of the old disk at this location. So we'll have to reformat that one to rename it, but we'll let Lido 7 do its thing here. Alright, the only one it didn't do right here was this one, so we're going to want to erase this one. And the reason it didn't do this one right is there was already a partition that started at the same place. I guess this is probably a bug in Lido. And we'll erase this. Alright, now that I have my partition set up, I can copy over a bunch of data. So we'll cut while I do that. Alright, I've copied over a bunch of files now. And the important one here is this System 753. System 753 was distributed by Apple for free and comes in 19 parts of a self-mounting image. So we're going to mount this and then we'll use that for installing System 7. Agree to the license agreement. And then this takes, relatively long time. So we'll be back after this finishes mounting. Alright, so that mounted. I have down in this corner my System 753 image mounted as a volume. And just go in here and click the installer. Do continue. And we want to install this onto PB system. And we'll just do an easy install. And we're off to the races here, so we'll come back after this finishes. Alright, our install is done. So we can quit out of the installer. And then we can restart this machine. And we should come back into System 7, a nice fresh install. Okay, so now that we have System 7 installed, we can actually use the dual monitor support. So to switch my primary monitor, I go to Control Panels and then Monitors. And we can see we have two monitors here. If I click and hold the Identify button, you can see that the internal one is labeled number 1. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. If you can see, there's a little title bar on number 1. That indicates the primary display. So if I drag that to number 2 and then save this, now I'm outputting my primary display to the secondary monitor, and I can capture it with the open source scan converter. I still don't have the settings quite right, so I apologize for some of the artifacting here, but I think you agree this is better than recording from a camera. Alright, I've installed a few things like this copy and cleaned up a little bit. So now let's work on getting AppleShare installed. I copied all this stuff down to the pbdata3 directory. If we look in networking, I have a bunch of disk images here that represent the AppleShare disks that it was distributed on. Now, AppleShare is commercial software, and it hasn't been distributed for probably 30 years. So, the archive that I could find on the internet was just a big stuff it directory that had all this stuff in it. And the installer didn't seem to like that, so I went ahead and created disk images. And, that's how it would have originally been distributed, was on a set of disks. And this seems to work much better. So disk images, I'm going to drag them into disk copy, and that should mount them all. I have to agree to the license agreement first. Alright, good deal. Now we have all of these AppleShare disks mounted. So this window was automatically opened when the AppleShare file server volume was mounted, but this is the disk that has the installer with it. So let's start the installer. So this is going to install on PB System, which is our system disk here, and we're going to want to customize this installation. I want the file server, the print server, and the Apple II setup. I don't need the workstation because System 7.5.3 includes an AppleShare client. So I'm not going to install that. So we'll click install, and we're off to the races. So this will take a minute. Alright, now with AppleShare installed, we need to restart. Alright, so we're back after a reboot. Let's get AppleShare configured. So AppleShare gets installed in the system folder of your main boot disk. In my case, PB System. Which is kind of ugly, but that's how things used to be back in this time. And we have two main programs we want to interact with. The first here is this AppleShare Administrator. And I'm going to make an alias of this and put it on my desktop for ease of use. And then also this AppleShare file server. Make an alias. Put this on my desktop. So AppleShare Admin is the administration console. And then this AppleShare file server is actually the server itself. Now this Powerbook doesn't have a lot of resources. It's got like 14 megabytes of RAM, an 030, so it's not super powerful. So I could set this to start up every boot, but I don't really want to because, if I'm running this, even though I can still multitask with the system, it's kind of slow. So for right now, we're just started and stop it manually. Alright, let's get into the AppleShare admin, and we'll have to do some basic setup here. So give this a server name and a password, which is of course displayed here in plain text for the world to see. Security was different back then. Alright, now we have to give the administrator user a password. And we can actually change the administrator's name here, but I'm going to leave it as administrator. But give him a password of just password. And we can create other users here when we're ready to, but for right now I just need the one. It's only me using this system anyhow. Okay, so next up we want to enable the Apple II startup service, which is done here in the file server preferences. And this will create certain additional folders that we'll look at next. Alright, that's done. So if we look on our PB System volume, we can now see we have an additional system folder, or rather a folder called System. And we have a users directory. So this folder called System, this is where GSOS is going to go. It needs to live here. And users is just, there's a directory for each user in here, kind of like a home directory. So, next we need to click on the user we want to add Apple II startup information to, and we'll go to Startup, Set Apple II Startup Information. And this is where we need to set our startup application. That's going to be here in the system folder, or rather the folder name system that was just created. Let's do basic.system. And then there's a prefix. So this is like a home directory. And so we could, if we wanted to, set this to users, administrators, and do this here. I think that's how this is supposed to be used, right? So you start up from this, and you save all your files here to what effectively is a home directory. So if we set OK, and then do verify Apple II startup info, that's the beginning of what we need to do. So now I'm going to start up this AppleShare file server. And right now we have no shared items, so I need to go back to the administrator here and do that. So if I go privileges, access information, want to share pbdata1, pbdata2, pbdata3, and pv system. Alright, so we've set our Apple II startup information, we've shared our volumes, we've started up the file server. Now let's flip over to the Apple II and see if we can boot. So on the Apple II, we need to get into the control panel, and we do that by hitting Reset, Control, and Option. Sometimes I have to do it twice. And we can hit 1 here to enter the control panel. Now the relevant thing here for us is under this slots menu. So the first slot is the printer port. This is where we connected our local talk cable. So we want to set this to your card. The next one that we care about is slot 7. We want to set this to built-in Apple Talk. And this next one controls the startup sequence. And we want to boot from Apple Talk, so we'll select slot 7. Now I have an Apple II GS with ROM version 1. If you have an Apple II GS with ROM version 3, this is going to look slightly different. And if you have one with ROM version 0, this won't work at all. You need to get an upgrade. So we'll hit enter here to save this, and then we will quit out of this menu. Now these settings are battery backed up, so if you have a battery installed, they'll be persistent through cold restarts. I've right now got the battery cut out, so I basically have to do this every time I power on the system. But we will fix that eventually. So if we hit quit here, this is now going to start to boot. So these dots that are appearing across the top of the screen, those indicate that it's loading the bootloader from the network. And we'll see this progress here. So let's log in as a registered user. It's going to say administrator and then password. And this will give me a list of volumes that I want to mount as part of boot up. Just going to keep this at PB system right now. That's the only one we need. And we fail. Now this failure is expected. And if we look at the AppleShare 3 manual, what we should do at this point is actually install GSOS into the system partition. And the way that it recommends to do that in the manual is to boot up from a GSOS network startup disk and then use the installation program to install files over the network into that system folder on our boot Mac, on our boot server Mac, which is the Powerbook. That's a real slow process. So I'm going to do that via emulation.